Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step quietly into a frozen night of 1884 where you find yourself wrapped in a wool coat, sitting inside a wooden stagecoach as it creaks across America's coldest frontier roads. Outside the small window, snow drifts like scattered feathers beneath a dark sky. The horses breathe clouds into the air, and every mile feels like a small conversation between you and the wilderness. The lantern flickers beside you, the leather seats complain with every bump, and you begin to understand that a peaceful night of travel in the 19th century comes with one tiny problem. You probably won't survive this kind of cold frontier adventure without a very serious appreciation for blankets, warm food, and not having a frozen mustache. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where you are listening from and what your local time is. It is always fascinating to imagine these old journeys unfolding while someone somewhere is relaxing at home. Now, dim the lights, and let us begin. You're sitting quietly as the stagecoach waits at the edge of a frontier settlement, a place where wooden buildings stand against the wind and the smell of smoke from nearby chimneys mixes with the sharp scent of snow. The year is 1884, and America is still a country where distance has a powerful meaning. A town that seems close on a map can feel impossibly far away when you are travelling through forests, mountains, and open plains. Your driver checks the harness one more time. You hear the soft jingle of metal fittings, the stamping of patient horses, and the muffled voices of travellers preparing for the long night ahead. Nobody rushes too much out here. Rushing is a luxury that belongs to warmer places and easier roads. You pull your coat tighter and climb into the coach. The doorway feels narrow, and the inside is already filled with the familiar smells of travel-wool clothing, old leather, wood, lantern oil, and the faint traces of food packed for the journey. You sit among strangers, each person carrying a different reason for being on this frozen road. Perhaps one traveller is heading toward a new job. Perhaps another is visiting family after months apart. Someone nearby might be carrying letters that connect distant communities, before telephones and quick transportation changed everyday life. A stagecoach was more than a vehicle. It was a moving thread that connected people scattered across enormous spaces. The famous stagecoach routes of the American West helped transport passengers, mail, and supplies between settlements. The stagecoach era reached its height before railroads took over many long-distance routes. But even in the 1880s, these journeys remained important in regions where tracks had not yet arrived. You feel the importance of the coach beneath you as the wheels begin to turn. The first movement is gentle, then the coach rocks forward with a familiar rhythm. Creak, roll, rattle, pause. The wooden frame responds to every stone and patch of frozen ground. You quickly discover that sleeping in a stagecoach is less like resting in a comfortable bed, and more like trying to nap inside a very determined wooden box that has decided to explore every bump on the road. You smile at the thought because there is something strangely comforting about it. The discomfort becomes part of the experience. The cold air slips through tiny gaps in the coach walls. The blanket across your lap becomes your closest companion. Every traveller adjusts their position, searching for that magical arrangement where your shoulder stops hitting the side of the coach and your boots stop feeling like blocks of ice. Of course, people travelling these routes had their own methods for handling winter conditions. Thick clothing, layered blankets, hot drinks, and careful planning were essential. Frontier travelers understood that survival often depended on ordinary objects used wisely. A simple scarf or a dry pair of socks could feel more valuable than a pocket full of coins when the temperature dropped. A curious little detail from 19th century life is that some travellers carried small personal items believed to provide comfort or protection during journeys, including unusual folk remedies and charms. One quirky frontier belief involved placing certain herbs or scented materials in clothing or luggage because people thought they could discourage illness or bad luck. Science would later disagree with many of these ideas, but on a lonely winter road, a small tradition could make a person feel less alone. You look around the coach and notice something beautiful about the silence between strangers. Nobody is staring at a glowing screen. Nobody is checking the time every few minutes. The outside world moves slowly, measured by horse steps and the changing shape of the landscape. The darkness beyond the window feels enormous, but inside this little wooden shelter, a temporary community forms. The passenger beside you whispers about the weather. Another person mentions a difficult road farther ahead. The driver listens carefully because every piece of information matters. Frontier travel depends on shared knowledge. A person who passed through yesterday might know about a washed-out bridge, deep snow, or a difficult section of trail. Historians still argue whether stagecoach travel in the late 19th century should be remembered mainly as a symbol of adventure, or as a demanding necessity for people who had limited alternatives. The romantic image of the frontier often focuses on bravery and exploration. But the everyday reality included exhaustion, uncertainty, and long hours spent simply trying to reach the next destination. The horses continue forward. Their breathing creates small clouds that disappear into the darkness. The wheels leave temporary marks in the snow, and the stars above appear impossibly bright because there are no city lights nearby to hide them. You begin to notice the strange beauty of the cold. The frontier night is not welcoming exactly. It does not promise comfort. It does not care if you are tired. Yet there is something peaceful about its honesty. The landscape asks nothing from you except patience. Inside the stagecoach, your eyes grow heavier. The rocking motion becomes almost musical. The voices around you become softer. The lantern flame dances gently as the coach continues into the unknown. And as you settle deeper into your blanket, you realize that this journey is not only about reaching a destination, it is about experiencing a world where every mile required effort, every traveler had a story, and every quiet moment beside the winter road carried a little piece of history. The stagecoach settles into its rhythm, and now you begin to notice the small world moving around you. The coach is no longer just a vehicle carrying you through the darkness. It feels almost like a tiny wooden room drifting across the frozen frontier. A room with wheels, rattling windows, and a very strong opinion about the condition of your spine. You shift your position carefully, trying to create a little comfort from the narrow seat. The traveller across from you pulls a blanket higher and closes their eyes. Someone near the door checks a small bundle of belongings, making sure nothing has slipped loose during the rough ride. Every person inside this coach has prepared in their own way for the cold, the distance, and the strange experience of sharing many hours with people they met only moments before. The stagecoach interior tells stories without speaking. The worn leather seats show years of passengers coming and going. The wooden walls carry scratches from countless journeys. A small lantern hangs nearby, its warm glow fighting against the freezing darkness outside. It is not a perfect light. It flickers and trembles whenever the coach hits a rough patch of ground. But that little flame becomes a comforting reminder that you're not completely surrounded by the night. You listen carefully. The sounds become familiar. The horses move in a steady pattern, their hooves pressing into the cold earth. The wheels complain against the trail. The leather straps creak with every turn. The driver occasionally calls out to the team, and the horses respond with renewed effort. There is a strange kind of music in all of this. Modern travellers often complain about delayed flights or uncomfortable seats, and those frustrations are real enough. But imagine replacing your airport chair with a wooden bench bouncing across frozen wilderness for hours. Suddenly that slightly annoying travel delay feels a little less dramatic. In 1884, many stagecoach journeys were still part of daily life in regions where railroads had not completely replaced overland transportation. Companies such as Wells Fargo had become famous for their stagecoach operations, carrying passengers, money, and important shipments across long routes. You're experiencing a world where a journey is measured not by minutes on a clock, but by weather, terrain, and the strength of animals. The passengers around you represent different corners of frontier society. There may be merchants carrying supplies, workers searching for opportunity, families relocating, or people simply trying to reconnect with someone far away. A stagecoach is not only a machine of transportation, it is a place where different lives briefly cross. You notice the careful way everyone protects their belongings. A small bag might contain letters, tools, clothing, or personal memories. In a world before easy communication, a letter could carry enormous emotional weight. A person might wait weeks for news from someone living hundreds of miles away. The cold outside makes everyone more aware of simple comforts. A warm drink becomes a treasure. A dry blanket feels like luxury. A brief stop at a station sounds almost magical. You begin to understand that frontier travellers measured comfort differently. They did not expect perfection. They appreciated survival. The stagecoach station system was an important part of these journeys. Stations provided places where horses could be changed. Passengers could rest briefly, and drivers could continue with fresh teams. These stops were often simple locations rather than grand buildings, but they were essential pieces of the transportation network. A little-known detail is that some stage stations became informal gathering places where travellers exchanged news, gossip, and rumours from distant settlements in isolated regions. A passing stagecoach could bring the newest information about weather, business, politics, or family matters. Imagine that for a moment. Today, people refresh news feeds every few seconds. In the frontier, the arrival of a coach might be the biggest update a community received for days. You glance outside the window again. The landscape is difficult to see clearly, but your imagination fills in the spaces. Snow-covered fields stretch away into darkness. Trees appear briefly before disappearing again. The road seems to continue forever. The driver has a difficult responsibility. The person at the front of the coach must understand the trail, the animals, and the changing conditions. A careless decision could make a long night even harder. The driver is not simply steering, they are reading the land. Historians still debate whether stagecoach drivers should be viewed primarily as skilled professionals or as adventurous figures shaped by frontier mythology. Some emphasize their technical abilities and knowledge of difficult routes, while others point out that later stories often exaggerated their dramatic image. You feel the coach slow slightly as the horses move through a rougher section of trail. Everyone becomes quieter. The sudden change reminds you how much these travellers depend on the environment. There are no streetlights showing the way. There are no quick rescue services waiting nearby. The journey requires trust. That trust extends between passengers as well. In a crowded coach, personal space is limited. You hear someone cough softly, someone else adjusting their coat, and another traveller quietly offering a small piece of food to a neighbour. Tiny acts of kindness become more noticeable when conditions are difficult. There is something deeply human about this cramped wooden box moving through the frozen night. Everyone inside has somewhere to go. Everyone carries memories, worries, and hopes. The stagecoach does not know their stories, but it carries them all the same. As the hours continue, your body slowly adapts to the motion. The first discomfort begins to fade into familiarity. The cold is still there. The seat is still hard. The road is still uneven. Yet your mind begins to focus on smaller details. You notice the smell of the lantern oil. You notice the warmth created by several people sitting together. You notice the peaceful moments between sounds when the coach glides briefly over smoother ground. The frontier night continues around you, enormous and quiet, but inside this moving wooden shelter, a small community travels onward, carried by horses, determination, and the simple human desire to reach somewhere else. The last lights of the settlement slowly disappear behind you, and the stagecoach enters a different kind of world. The glow from the windows of the buildings fades into the distance until there is only the lantern inside the coach and the pale reflection of snow outside. You realize that the frontier is not simply a place on a map. It is a feeling. It is the moment when familiar sounds become quiet, when neighbors become miles away, and when the land around you begins to feel much larger than yourself. You look back once more through the small window. The settlement that seemed important only an hour ago now appears tiny and fragile. A few buildings, a few trails, a few people trying to create a life in a vast landscape. The stagecoach continues forward, carrying you away from the comfort of walls, fireplaces, and nearby voices. The road ahead stretches into darkness. Snow covers much of the ground, hiding small details that would be easy to notice during daylight. The driver watches carefully, guided by experience and memory. You imagine the trail beneath the snow, the frozen earth, the familiar turns, and the landmarks that only someone who knows this route would recognize. The horses move steadily. They are powerful animals, but even they must work carefully in these conditions. Their muscles pull against the weight of the coach while their breath rises into the cold air. You feel a strange respect for them. They are not just transportation, they are partners in this long winter journey. Inside the coach, conversation becomes quieter. Earlier, passengers exchange stories and observations, but now the darkness encourages reflection. The steady movement creates a sleepy atmosphere. Words become slower, thoughts become softer. You pull your blanket closer and listen to the world outside. The wind moves across the open land with a low, distant sound. Snow brushes against the side of the coach. The wheels continue their endless pattern. There is something almost hypnotic about travelling through a place where nature controls the schedule. During the 19th century, many Americans moved westward seeking land, work, and new opportunities. The expansion of settlements across the continent created a growing need for transportation routes that connected isolated communities. Stagecoach lines became one answer to that challenge, helping people and supplies move through regions where rail connections were incomplete. You imagine the people who travelled before you and those who will travel after you. Each passenger leaves a temporary mark on this road, a footprint near a station, a name written in a guestbook, a story told to another traveller. The frontier can feel empty, but it is filled with invisible memories. A curious detail from frontier travel is that some stagecoach passengers carried small personal survival kits containing items that might seem unusual today. Alongside practical objects like food, matches, or tools, some people packed lucky charms, special tokens, or personal objects they believed brought protection during difficult journeys. It was a reminder that when people face uncertainty, they often carry not only supplies but also symbols of hope. You watch the darkness outside and think about how different this experience is from modern travel today. A person can cross great distances while surrounded by maps, signals, and constant information. Here, you have only the movement of the coach, the judgment of the driver, and the patience to let the journey unfold. The frontier asks you to slow down. That might be the hardest lesson of all. There is no way to hurry the horses beyond their limits. There is no way to force the weather to cooperate. There is no shortcut through the night. You simply continue, mile after mile, accepting the pace of the world around you. Historians still argue whether the frontier experience was defined more by opportunity or hardship. Some view westward expansion as a story of ambition and possibility, while others focus on the isolation and difficulties faced by people living far from established communities, like many parts of history. The answer depends on whose footsteps you're following. The coach suddenly rises over a small hill, and for a moment you can see farther into the darkness. The moonlight touches the snow, creating a quiet landscape of silver and shadow. The view lasts only briefly before the road bends again, but the image stays with you. You notice how the cold changes everything. Sounds travel differently. Distances feel different. A single light in the distance becomes incredibly meaningful. A small cabin window glowing through the trees would not seem ordinary here. It would feel like a tiny promise that warmth and human connection still exist. The passengers begin settling into their own quiet routines. One person closes their eyes. Another rests against the side of the coach. Someone carefully checks the position of their coat before trying to sleep. Everyone has developed small habits to make the journey easier. You try to find your own comfortable position again. Your shoulders relax slightly. The rocking of the coach becomes familiar. The sounds that first seemed rough and unpleasant now create a strange sense of security. The frontier outside remains wild and endless, but inside the coach there is order. The lantern burns, the horses continue. The driver guides the team. The passengers endure. This is the rhythm of the winter road. You're no longer simply leaving a settlement behind. You're entering a space where patience matters, where every mile has meaning, and where the quiet beauty of the landscape appears beside the challenges of survival. The night grows deeper around you. The stagecoach continues forward, carrying you farther into America's cold frontier, where the darkness feels endless and every sound tells a small story. The trail carries you deeper into the northern wilderness, but the empty landscape is not truly empty. Beneath the snow and beyond the darkness, there are communities connected by necessity, patience, and a shared understanding that life on the frontier depends on cooperation as the stagecoach moves forward. You begin to imagine the people who live beside these winter roads, the families who wake before sunrise, the workers who maintain supplies, and the travellers who arrive carrying news from places that seem impossibly far away. The coach continues its steady rhythm. The passengers remain quiet, but your thoughts wander beyond the wooden walls. You picture small settlements appearing between forests and open stretches of land. A few buildings gathered together. A general store with shelves filled with basic supplies. A blacksmith working near a warm fire. A small post office where letters arrive after long journeys. These places are not large, but they are important. Frontier communities are built around relationships. A person might depend on a neighbour for help repairing equipment, finding shelter, or sharing information about the conditions ahead. In a world where distances are measured in days rather than hours, people learn that cooperation is not simply polite, it is practical. The Stagecoach itself is part of this network. It carries more than passengers. It carries connection, a letter from a distant relative, a package containing needed goods, a newspaper with stories from cities that feel almost imaginary. Each arrival brings a small piece of the outside world. One well-established detail from this period is that the United States expanded its postal and transportation networks significantly during the 19th century, helping connect growing settlements across vast distances. Stage routes, mail services, and later railroads transformed how people communicated and travelled. You feel the importance of that change as your coach rolls through the cold night, because every mile represents human effort trying to overcome geography. The driver guides the horses with calm confidence. The person at the front of the coach knows that every stop, every turn, and every decision matters. The road may look like a simple line through the wilderness, but it is actually a carefully maintained connection between communities. You imagine a small station waiting somewhere ahead. Perhaps there is a warm room where travellers can briefly escape the cold. Perhaps someone is preparing food or tending to fresh horses. These stations are like quiet islands scattered across the landscape, offering a moment of comfort before the journey continues. Inside the coach, you notice how passengers begin to create their own temporary community. Earlier, everyone was a stranger. Now, after hours together, small bonds have formed. Someone shares a bit of food. Another person offers advice about staying warm. A quiet conversation begins and ends without anyone needing to force it. The frontier has a way of making ordinary kindness feel larger. A traveller who shares a blanket or offers a reassuring word is not performing a grand heroic act. They are simply recognizing that everyone inside this coach is facing the same cold night. The road has made them companions, even if only for a short time. A curious little practice from the era involved travellers paying close attention to signs from nature when planning movement through remote areas. Some people watched animal behaviour, cloud patterns, and wind changes as informal clues about approaching weather. While these observations were not always accurate, they reflected the practical knowledge people developed when modern forecasting tools were unavailable. You glance toward the window and think about how much attention earlier travellers gave to the world around them. Today, many people ignore small changes in the environment because technology handles much of that awareness. On this journey, every sound and every change in the sky seems meaningful. The wind shifts slightly. The horses adjust their pace. The driver listens. Everyone notices. The frontier rewards attention. The darkness outside is still deep, but you no longer feel as separated from the landscape. You're beginning to understand the rhythm of this place. The wilderness is not simply a barrier, it is a world with its own patterns, one that people learn to navigate through experience. Researchers continue to discuss whether frontier communities were mostly defined by independence or by cooperation. The popular image often celebrates the lone traveller facing the wilderness alone. But many studies of everyday life show how much people depended on shared labour, local knowledge, and mutual support. You look around the coach again and realise that this small vehicle represents both ideas. Every passenger has their own destination and personal story, yet everyone depends on the same driver, the same horses, and the same road. The journey continues through the frozen night. You think about the workers who make travel possible, the people who repair coaches, the people who care for horses, the people who prepare meals at stations, the people who clear paths and share information. Their names may not appear in famous stories, but their efforts keep the frontier moving. There is something calming about remembering these quieter lives. History is often filled with famous figures and dramatic moments, but it is also built by ordinary people repeating small acts every day. The coach rolls onward, carrying you past places you cannot see and toward destinations you have not reached. Snow gathers along the road. The lantern continues glowing. The passengers breathe softly in the warmth they have created together. You begin to feel sleepy again. Not because the journey is easy, but because you have become accustomed to its rhythm. The frontier no longer feels like a frightening unknown. It feels like a vast landscape filled with human stories waiting quietly beneath the snow. And as the horses continue forward, you remain inside this moving wooden shelter, travelling through a world where every road connects people, every stop carries meaning, and every cold night reveals the strength hidden in ordinary lives. The stagecoach continues through the frozen night, and now your attention turns fully inward. The world outside remains a dark painting of snow, trees, and distant hills. But inside this wooden coach is where the real story is unfolding. You begin to notice every small detail of this travelling space, every sound, every movement, every little habit of the people sharing this uncomfortable but unforgettable ride. You rest your hands near the warmth of your coat and feel the rough texture of the fabric. The seat beneath you is firm and unforgiving. It reminds you that comfort in 1884 is a very different idea from comfort today. There is no soft cushion waiting to support you. There is no temperature control adjusting itself. There is no gentle notification telling you the next stop is arriving soon. Instead, you have a lantern, a blanket, a few fellow travellers, and a great deal of patience. The coach moves beneath you like a wooden boat crossing a frozen sea. Every wheel rotation creates a familiar pattern. The front wheels rise over uneven ground. The body of the coach shifts, and everyone inside instinctively moves with it. After several hours, your body begins learning the rhythm without permission. You almost stop noticing the bumps, almost. Then a particularly rough section of trail reminds you that your sleeping arrangement is not exactly a luxury hotel. You quietly adjust your position and think that whoever invented the phrase restful travel probably never spent a winter night inside a 19th century stagecoach. Still, there is a certain charm in this discomfort. The coach forces everyone to slow down. It creates a shared experience. A group of strangers becomes a temporary household moving through the darkness together. You listen to the conversations around you. They come and go like small waves. Someone speaks about a town they recently visited. Another traveller mentions the price of supplies. A passenger near the corner talks about family waiting at the end of the route. These conversations reveal something important about frontier life. People carried their entire worlds with them. A simple bag might hold clothing, tools, letters, or objects connected to loved ones. Travel was not just movement across land. It was a bridge between different parts of a person's life. The inside of the stagecoach also reveals the social reality of the era. People from different backgrounds often shared the same cramped space. A merchant might sit beside a labourer. A traveller with years of experience might sit beside someone making their first long journey. For a few hours, everyone had to negotiate the same challenges. A notable detail from transportation history is that stagecoach travel required carefully designed vehicles capable of handling difficult terrain. Coaches were built to be durable rather than luxurious, with strong frames and suspension systems meant to reduce the impact of rough roads. Even with those improvements, passengers still experience plenty of shaking and discomfort. You look around at the wooden walls and imagine the thousands of conversations that might have happened inside similar coaches. Arguments, friendships, worries, jokes, quiet moments of reflection. Every journey created a small world that disappeared when passengers stepped out at their destination. A fascinating little oddity from the period is that some travellers used bits of newspaper or cloth inside their clothing and luggage, not only for practical purposes, but also to create extra insulation during cold journeys. These simple tricks were part of a larger culture of making do with what was available. Frontier life often depended on creativity with ordinary materials. The lantern flickers as the coach moves forward. Shadows dance across the faces of the passengers for a moment. The scene feels almost timeless. The same basic human needs remain familiar across generations. People want warmth, they want safety, they want connection. They want to know that the road ahead will eventually lead somewhere welcoming. You notice the driver's voice from outside. It is calm and controlled. The horses respond, the coach continues. There is quiet confidence in the people travelling this way, not because they are fearless, but because they have learned how to continue despite uncertainty. They understand that difficult conditions are part of the journey. Academic discussions continue over whether stagecoach travel created stronger social connections or simply forced people into temporary cooperation because circumstances demanded it. Some researchers emphasize the friendships and exchanges created during these journeys, while others point out that many travelers were simply focused on reaching their destination safely. Perhaps both ideas can exist together. You look at the passengers beside you and see both. They are strangers brought together by necessity. But within this small space, moments of kindness appear naturally. Someone shifts to make more room. Someone shares a piece of food. Someone quietly checks if another traveller is warm enough. Small actions become memorable because the conditions make them meaningful. The coach continues through the night, and you start to appreciate the strange balance of the journey. It is uncomfortable, but peaceful. It is exhausting, but beautiful. It is lonely outside, but strangely social inside. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sound surround you. The wheels create their steady song. The horses keep their careful pace. The wind moves around the coach like a distant whisper. You imagine the frontier beyond the window. Somewhere out there are mountains, forests, rivers, and settlements waiting for morning. But for now, your world is this wooden cabin on wheels. The stagecoach carries you through the darkness, and every small detail becomes part of the memory. The smell of leather, The warmth of the lantern, the movement of the coach, the quiet breathing of fellow travellers. You're not simply riding through the frontier. You're living inside one small moment of it. The night grows colder as the stagecoach continues deeper into the wilderness. You notice the change slowly. At first, it is only a sharper feeling against your cheeks when a small draught slips through the wooden walls. Then it becomes the kind of cold that seems to settle into every corner of the landscape, making the trees stand silent and the snow shine beneath the moon. Inside the coach, everyone becomes more aware of the temperature. Coats are pulled tighter, blankets are adjusted. Hands disappear into sleeves and pockets. The warm glow of the lantern seems even more valuable now because the darkness outside feels endless. You understand that this is the part of the journey where patience matters most. The excitement of leaving the settlement has faded. The first conversations have slowed. The road has become a long, quiet challenge. The horses continue forward, step after step, wheel after wheel. The stagecoach does not hurry. You listen to the driver outside and imagine the concentration required to guide the team through the night. A driver must recognize the trail, understand the condition of the horses, and make decisions when visibility is limited. The darkness is not simply an absence of light. It is another obstacle to navigate. You think about how different travel feels when you cannot depend on technology. Today, a traveller can check a map, receive directions instantly, or contact someone from almost anywhere. On this frozen road in 1884, the journey depends on memory, preparation, and experience. The stagecoach moves through a landscape that seems almost untouched. Snow covers the ground like a blanket placed carefully over the earth. The trees create dark shapes along the horizon. The wind occasionally rises and then disappears, leaving behind a silence so complete that you can hear the coach itself breathing through its wooden joints. A well-known fact from American transportation history is that stagecoach travel was gradually declining in many areas during the 1880s, as railroads expanded and offered faster long-distance movement. However, remote regions still relied on coaches because rail lines had not reached every community. You are travelling through one of those spaces where older and newer forms of transportation exist side by side. The passengers seem to sense the seriousness of the night. Even the more talkative travellers become quieter. There is a shared understanding that the journey requires attention. Someone checks the lantern. Someone adjusts a coat. Someone looks through the window, searching for any sign of the road ahead. These small actions reveal how people adapted to difficult conditions. They did not control the weather or the landscape, but they learned how to respond. You think about the practical knowledge carried by frontier travellers. They understood the importance of keeping supplies organized, protecting valuable items from moisture, and preparing for unexpected delays. A journey could take longer than planned because of snow, damaged roads, or tired animals. A curious little piece of everyday history is that some travellers placed heated stones wrapped in cloth near their feet or inside blankets to create extra warmth during cold conditions. This simple method had been used in different forms for generations, long before modern heating systems made cold weather travel easier. It was an example of using available resources to create a little comfort. You imagine someone preparing such a stone before leaving a station, carefully wrapping it and placing it where it could provide warmth for hours. It seems like a small thing, but during a freezing night, small things become important. The coach suddenly slows. Everyone notices. The conversation stops. For a moment, you only hear the horses and the wind. The driver is assessing the trail ahead. Perhaps the ground has become uneven. Perhaps the snow is deeper. Perhaps there is simply a moment when caution is better than speed. This pause reminds you of the fragile relationship between humans and nature on the frontier. People could build roads, create vehicles, and establish communities, but the landscape still had the final word. Scholars continue to examine whether frontier travel encouraged a stronger sense of independence or revealed how deeply people depended on each other. The image of the solitary traveller facing the wilderness is powerful, but the reality of these journeys often involved cooperation between drivers, passengers, station workers, and local communities. The coach begins moving again, and everyone releases a quiet breath. The journey continues. You settle back into your seat and notice something unexpected. The cold that seemed unbearable earlier has become something you understand. You know where it enters. You know how the coach sounds when the wind changes. You know how the passengers move when they need more warmth. The unfamiliar has become familiar. That is one of the quiet lessons of difficult journeys. The things that seem impossible at the beginning often become manageable when experienced one moment at a time. The lantern continues glowing. The horses continue walking. The road continues stretching into the darkness. You begin to feel the pull of sleep again. The movement of the coach creates a gentle rhythm. Your thoughts slow down. The sounds around you become softer. You imagine the people who travelled these routes before and after this night. They faced the same cold, heard the same wheels, and watched the same stars above the frontier. For a brief moment, you are connected to all of them. The stagecoach carries you forward through the deepest hours of the night, through the coldest parts of the journey, where endurance becomes ordinary and where every quiet sound tells you that you are still moving. The stagecoach continues into the quieter part of the night, and the silence inside the coach begins to change. Earlier, the passengers spoke to fill the unfamiliar hours. Now, after travelling together for so long, the quiet feels comfortable. It is no longer the silence of strangers. It is the silence of people who have shared a difficult road and no longer need constant conversation to feel connected. You sit back and listen to the small sounds around you. Someone breathes slowly while resting against the side of the coach. Another traveller quietly adjusts a blanket. The lantern gives a soft flicker, creating gentle shadows that move across the wooden interior. The coach continues its steady motion. The road continues beneath you. The night continues above you. There is something almost peaceful about the repetition. You remember that this journey began with uncertainty. The cold felt sharper. The darkness felt larger. The people around you were unfamiliar faces. But now, the coach has become a small world with its own habits and its own rhythm. The passengers begin sharing stories in softer voices, not the loud conversations of a busy room, but the quiet exchanges that happen when people are tired and thoughtful. A traveller across from you describes a town they recently visited. They mention a store, a person they met, and a small event that might seem ordinary but has stayed in their memory. Another passenger talks about a family member waiting at the end of the route. Their voice carries a mixture of hope and impatience. You realize that every person in this coach is carrying a story that extends far beyond this night. The stagecoach is only a small part of their journey. For some, it represents a new beginning. For others, it is a return. For someone else, it may simply be one more difficult trip required by everyday life. One significant development of the era was the continued growth of communication networks during the 19th century, including expanded postal services that allowed people in distant communities to exchange information more reliably. The arrival of a stagecoach carrying mail could transform an ordinary day into an important event because letters connected people separated by enormous distances. You imagine someone waiting near a small settlement, watching the road and hoping the next coach brings news from someone far away. The single envelope could carry emotions that travelled hundreds of miles inside the coach. The stories continue. Someone mentions a strange weather event they once experienced. Another traveller laughs quietly about a difficult journey that went wrong. The humour is gentle because everyone understands that hardship is easier to remember once it has passed. You notice how people use stories as a form of warmth. Not physical warmth, human warmth. A shared memory can make a cold night feel less lonely. A lesser-known habit among some 19th century travellers was keeping small personal journals or notes during long journeys. Not everyone could write regularly, but those who did sometimes recorded details about roads, weather, people, and places they encountered. These small observations provide glimpses into everyday experiences that official records often overlooked. You picture a traveller sitting in this very type of coach, trying to write while the vehicle moves over uneven ground. The handwriting would probably shake with every bump. The words might be uneven, yet those notes could preserve a moment that would otherwise disappear. History is often built from grand events, but it is also created through ordinary observations. You look around at the passengers again and wonder what their lives will become after this night. Will they remember the strangers beside them? Will they tell someone about the freezing journey through the frontier? Will this coach ride become a small story they repeat years later? There is no way to know. The road carries everyone forward. Experts have not reached a complete agreement on whether frontier travel encouraged deeper social connections or simply created temporary relationships formed by necessity. Some researchers believe these shared journeys helped strangers develop trust and community. Others suggest that passengers often remained focused on personal goals rather than forming lasting bonds. Perhaps the answer depends on the traveller. You think about the different people sitting around you. One person may remember the conversation, another may remember the cold. Someone else may only remember the moment they finally stepped out of the coach at the end of the journey. Memory works differently for everyone. The driver calls to the horses, and the coach continues forward. The passengers slowly return to their own thoughts. The stories fade into silence, but the feeling remains. You feel connected to these people. Even though you know the connection will end when the journey does, that is one of the strange qualities of travel. A person can share a few hours with someone they may never meet again. Yet those hours can still matter. The darkness outside remains vast, but the inside of the coach feels smaller and warmer. The passengers are no longer just individuals travelling the same route. They're companions of the night. The sound of the wheels becomes almost like a lullaby. The horses keep their pace. The lantern keeps glowing. The stories rest quietly in the air. You close your eyes for a moment and let the voices, the movement, and the cold frontier night blend together. The journey is still long, but you're no longer thinking only about reaching the destination. You're noticing the moments along the way, the shared laughter, the quiet conversations, the simple comfort of knowing that others are travelling beside you. And as the stagecoach moves deeper into the frozen wilderness, you drift closer to sleep, carried by the sounds of the road and the stories of the people who share this remarkable night. The night continues, and the stagecoach carries you into the part of the journey where every small decision matters. The comfort of familiar places is far behind now. There are no nearby streets, no bright windows, and no easy solutions waiting if something goes wrong. The frontier asks travelers to rely on preparation, experience, and the simple tools they carry with them. You look around the coach and notice how much attention everyone gives to ordinary objects. A blanket is not just a blanket, it is protection from the cold. A small container of food is not just a meal, it is energy for the miles ahead. A dry pair of gloves is not just clothing, it is a little piece of comfort in a harsh environment. The people of the frontier understood something that modern travellers often forget. Small things can become important when conditions are difficult. You adjust your coat and feel the layers beneath it. Each piece of clothing has a purpose. The outer layer blocks wind. The inner layers hold warmth. The scarf protects your face when the cold air pushes through the gaps in the coach. The passengers have developed their own methods for staying comfortable. Someone keeps their hands tucked close to their body. Someone else carefully protects a small package from the snow. The travellers are not fighting the winter, they are working with what they have. By the 1880s, many people living in remote regions had developed practical systems for surviving difficult weather, including storing supplies, preparing homes for winter, and planning travel around seasonal conditions. Life on the frontier depended heavily on knowing the environment and respecting its challenges. The Stagecoach reflects that same understanding. Every journey requires planning. The driver must consider the route, the condition of the horses, and the possibility of changing weather. Passengers must decide what to bring and what they can leave behind. You imagine the preparation before this trip began, someone packing food carefully, someone checking clothing, someone making sure important papers were protected. The journey may look spontaneous from inside the moving coach, but much of survival happened before the first wheel turned. Outside, the wilderness remains silent. Inside, the passengers continue their careful routines. You notice the way people conserve energy. Nobody wastes movement. Nobody opens the door longer than necessary. Nobody ignores the cold. The frontier teaches attention because carelessness has consequences. A charmingly strange detail from winter travel traditions is that some people carried small pieces of food believed to provide extra strength or protection during difficult journeys. Certain travellers preferred specific dried fruits, herbs, or homemade mixtures because they believed these items helped maintain health during long trips. Some beliefs were practical, while others were connected to family traditions passed down through generations. You smile at the thought, today. People might carefully choose a travel snack based on convenience or taste. A frontier traveller might choose something because a parent, grandparent, or experienced neighbour insisted it had special value. Traditions often travel with people. The coach moves over another rough section of road, and everyone holds on. There is no complaint. There's only acceptance. The journey's difficult, but everyone knew that before leaving. You begin to understand the mindset required for frontier travel. Patience was not optional. It was part of everyday life. The passengers could not demand that the weather change. They could not force the horses to move faster. They could not create a smoother road with the simple request. They had to wait. They had to adapt. They had to continue. Researchers continue to explore whether frontier survival created a culture of self-reliance, or whether the popular image of independence hides the importance of cooperation. Many stories celebrate individuals overcoming challenges alone, but daily survival often depended on shared knowledge, assistance from neighbours, and support from local communities. You look around the coach and see evidence of both. Every person has their own strength and determination, yet everyone benefits from the work of others. The driver depends on the passengers staying calm. The passengers depend on the driver's skill. The entire journey depends on the people who maintain the routes and support the stations. Even the horses depend on careful preparation. The frontier is not conquered by one person. It is managed through countless small efforts. You listen to the sounds outside again. The wind moves over the landscape. Snow brushes against the coach. The horses continue their steady pace. There is something calming about knowing that people have travelled through similar conditions for generations. They face the same cold air, the same darkness, and the same uncertainty. Their experiences created knowledge that was passed from one traveller to another. You begin to appreciate the quiet intelligence of ordinary people, the person who knows how to pack a bag efficiently, the driver who recognizes a trail beneath snow, the traveller who knows how to make a little warmth last longer. These skills rarely appear in dramatic stories, but they shaped daily life. The stagecoach continues through the coldest hours. The outside world remains demanding, but inside the coach you feel a growing sense of confidence. You understand the rhythm now. You understand the sounds. You understand that survival is not one great heroic moment. It is a collection of small choices, a properly tied bundle, a carefully planned route, a shared blanket, a patient attitude. The journey continues, and the frozen frontier stretches ahead. Yet you're no longer simply a passenger watching history from a distance. You're experiencing the small details that made these journeys possible. The stagecoach rolls onward through the night, carrying ordinary people who understand that, even in the coldest places, warmth can be created through preparation, cooperation, and the quiet determination to keep moving. The stagecoach moves deeper into the winter night, and the road begins to reveal its more difficult side. The earlier rhythm that felt almost peaceful now carries a new sense of caution. The wilderness around you is beautiful, but beauty does not make the journey easier. Snow, distance, and darkness remain constant reminders that this landscape demands respect. You notice the driver becoming more focused. The relaxed confidence from earlier remains, but every movement is now careful. A hand adjusts the reins, a voice guides the horses, a pause allows the team to find the safest path. The passengers feel the change. Nobody needs to explain it. Everyone understands. The road has become more challenging. You look through the window and see only fragments of the world outside. A line of trees, a slope covered in snow, the faint outline of the trail disappearing ahead. The darkness hides details that would be obvious during the day. This is where experience becomes valuable. The driver is not simply following a road. The driver's reading clues, the shape of the land, the condition of the snow, the movement of the horses, the sound of the wheels. A major change shaping American travel during this era was the gradual improvement of transportation networks. But many remote areas still depended on difficult overland routes. Even as railroads expanded, isolated communities continued using stagecoaches because geography often determined what transportation options were possible. You feel that reality beneath you with every bump. A railroad line might have connected one major city to another, but many smaller settlements remained far away from those routes. For people living in remote regions, the stagecoach was not simply an old-fashioned vehicle. It was an essential link to supplies, communication, and opportunity. The coach slows again. The horses move carefully through deeper snow. Everyone becomes still. This moment reminds you how fragile travel could be in the 19th century. A journey that looked simple on paper could become complicated when nature changed the conditions. A lesser-known habit among winter travellers was carrying small tools that could help solve unexpected problems along the way. Items such as basic repair equipment, extra pieces of fabric, or simple supplies could become extremely useful during delays. These objects were not impressive, but they represented preparation and practical thinking. You imagine a traveller checking a small bag before leaving, making sure the essentials are ready. The items may seem ordinary, but ordinary things often become extraordinary when circumstances become difficult. The wind grows stronger for a while, and you hear it pressing against the coach walls. The sound is almost like a distant conversation between the storm and the travellers inside. The passengers remain quiet. Some close their eyes, some stare out into the darkness, some simply listen. There is a special kind of silence that appears when people understand they are facing something larger than themselves. This stagecoach continues. The wheels turn, the horses pull, the night moves forward. You think about the emotional side of these journeys. It was not only physical endurance that travellers needed, they also needed mental strength. A person could become tired from uncertainty, from waiting, and from not knowing exactly what was ahead. Researchers continue to discuss whether frontier travellers were naturally more resilient than people today, or whether their circumstances simply required them to develop stronger coping skills. Some historians suggest that difficult environments encouraged practical confidence, while others argue that people were responding to challenges that anyone would find demanding. You look around the coach and see examples of quiet resilience. Nobody is giving a dramatic speech about courage. Nobody is trying to appear heroic. They are simply continuing. That may be one of the most realistic forms of bravery. Continuing. The road eventually becomes smoother again, and the tension inside the coach begins to fade. The passengers relax slightly. Someone quietly speaks. Another person adjusts their blanket. These small moments of comfort return. You notice how quickly people adapt. A difficult section of road becomes a memory almost as soon as it ends. The travellers do not spend hours complaining about what happened. They prepare for what comes next. That attitude feels very different from modern life, where convenience often shapes expectations. Here, patience is part of the journey itself. You begin to appreciate the relationship between humans and the frontier. The land is not an enemy. It is a challenge that requires understanding. People who lived and travelled in these environments developed a deep awareness of seasons, weather, and distance. The cold night continues. The stagecoach continues. You continue. As the hours pass, you feel the strange combination of exhaustion and calm that comes from travelling through a difficult landscape. Your body is tired, but your mind is awake. Every sound seems meaningful. The creak of wood, the movement of wheels, the soft breathing of passengers, the steady steps of horses. These sounds become part of the memory you are creating. You think about how many people experience similar nights, different roads, different destinations, different reasons for travelling. Yet the same basic experience remained. A wooden coach, a frozen trail, a sky full of stars, a group of people trusting each other enough to continue. The stagecoach carries you onward, and the frontier night keeps unfolding. The challenges are real, but so is the quiet beauty of the journey. Every difficult moment reveals something about the people who travelled these roads and the determination that carried them forward. The stagecoach continues forward, and as the night deepens, you find yourself paying closer attention to the world beyond the window. The darkness no longer feels like a blank space. Instead, it feels full of hidden details waiting for the right moment to appear. Every now and then, the moon reveals a piece of the landscape, giving you a brief glimpse of the frontier that surrounds you. You see the outline of tall trees standing against the sky. You notice the gentle rise and fall of the land beneath the snow. You catch the movement of something small disappearing into the distance before you can understand what it was. The wilderness is always nearby. It is never completely silent. The stagecoach carries you through a living landscape. You begin to imagine what exists beyond the trail. Somewhere in the darkness are streams covered by ice, animals searching for shelter, and small settlements waiting for morning. The frontier is not empty. It is simply spread out in a way that makes every sign of life feel precious. The passengers notice these things too. Someone points quietly toward a shape moving near the trees. Another person mentions a place they passed during a previous journey. These small observations become part of the experience, tiny pieces of conversation created by the landscape itself. An important reality of American life in the late 19th century was that many communities depended on local knowledge of their surroundings. People living in rural and remote areas often understood seasonal changes, animal behavior, and weather patterns because those details affected daily decisions. Survival was connected to observation. You think about that skill now. Modern travelers often move through landscapes without needing to understand them deeply. A road sign tells us where to go. A device shows the route. A forecast predicts the weather. But on this frozen trail, awareness comes from experience. The driver knows the road because of memory. The passengers learn the environment through attention. The animals respond to the conditions around them. Everyone is connected to the landscape. The coach moves past areas that might have been important landmarks to earlier travellers. A particular hill could signal that a station was approaching. A line of trees might mark a safer path. A frozen river might represent either a shortcut or a danger depending on the conditions. The frontier is filled with invisible information. A forgotten little custom from the period was the habit of naming certain locations based on memorable events, unusual features, or stories connected to them. A hill, stream, or crossing might receive a name because of something that happened there, or because travellers needed an easy way to remember the place. These names became part of local history, preserving small pieces of human experience. You imagine travellers passing these places and sharing the stories behind them. Someone might say, "This is where the road changes," or "This is the place people remember because of that strange winter storm." The landscape becomes a collection of memories. The stagecoach continues through the night, and you feel a growing curiosity about the people who travelled this route before you. How many passengers looked through the same window? How many wondered what existed beyond the next hill? How many carried hopes and worries similar to your own? The coach is moving through physical space, but it is also moving through layers of time. The snow outside hides footprints from earlier travellers. The road covers countless journeys. Every mile has been crossed by people whose names may never be recorded. The interpretation of frontier life remains contested among researchers. Some view these remote landscapes as places where people discovered freedom and opportunity. Others emphasize the difficulties, uncertainty, and isolation that shaped everyday existence. The same road could represent adventure to one traveller and hardship to another. You look outside again and understand why both perspectives exist. The frontier is beautiful. The frontier is demanding. It can offer possibility while requiring sacrifice. The stagecoach passes through another quiet stretch, and the passengers become still again. The darkness creates a feeling of separation from the rest of the world. For a few hours, your entire universe is this coach, this road, and the landscape surrounding you. The cold air outside feels distant because of the warmth created inside. The lantern continues to glow. The wooden walls protect you from the wind. The sounds of travel provide a steady rhythm. You notice how much the human mind searches for signs of connection. A distant light, a familiar landmark, a sound that suggests another person is nearby. On the frontier, these small signs carried enormous meaning. A cabin window glowing through the trees would not simply be a light. It would be reassurance. A trail marker would not simply be a sign. It would be guidance. A familiar voice at a station would not simply be conversation. It would be welcome. The stagecoach continues onward, carrying you through a landscape where every detail matters. The animals, the weather, the terrain, and the people all play a role in the journey. You close your eyes briefly and listen. The wheels continue their steady pattern. The horses continue their careful steps. The wind moves across the frozen land. The frontier remains vast, but it no longer feels unknown. You're beginning to see the hidden world beyond the window, the world of small signs, quiet stories, and forgotten places that made these journeys possible. The night still has many hours left, and the stagecoach still has miles to travel. Yet you feel a strange sense of peace knowing that this road is not simply a path through the wilderness, it is a path through human memory. The stagecoach settles into the deepest rhythm of the night, and something inside you begins to change. The journey that once demanded your full attention now feels almost familiar. The darkness outside remains enormous, but the sounds around you have become predictable. The coach rocks gently. The horses maintain their pace. The passengers breathe quietly. You're no longer counting every mile. You are simply travelling. The movement of the coach becomes a kind of lullaby, not the soft music of a comfortable room, but a rougher, older melody created by wood, wheels, leather, and footsteps. The sounds repeat again and again until your mind begins to follow their pattern. Creak, roll, pause, continue. You settle deeper into your blanket and allow yourself to relax. The seat is still hard. The cold still exists. The journey is still demanding, but your body has learned the rhythm of the road. There is a strange comfort in repetition. The same motion that seemed uncomfortable at the beginning now feels reassuring. The same sounds that once interrupted your thoughts now help quiet them. You think about how travellers of the past found moments of peace during difficult journeys. They did not need perfect conditions to experience calm. Sometimes calm came from accepting the conditions around them. By the late 19th century, stagecoach routes had become an important part of regional transportation in areas where other forms of travel were limited. While railroads transformed movement across large portions of the country, many remote communities continued depending on coaches for passengers, supplies, and communication. You feel that history in the movement beneath you. This is not just a ride through snow. It is part of a larger network that connected people who might otherwise have remained separated by enormous distances. The passengers around you slowly drift between conversation and silence. Someone whispers a final comment before closing their eyes. Another person watches the lantern for a while, perhaps enjoying the simple movement of the flame. The coach creates its own nighttime routine. People become aware of each other without needing to speak. A small shift tells someone that another traveller needs more room. A quiet cough reminds everyone that they're sharing the same space. A blanket being adjusted becomes part of the familiar soundtrack. You notice how different this is from modern ideas of privacy. Today, people often create personal spaces wherever they go. They wear headphones, look at screens, and separate themselves from the world around them. Inside this stagecoach, separation is impossible. The journey creates a temporary community. A surprisingly practical detail from the era was that some travellers arranged their belongings carefully to create extra comfort during long rides. Bags were sometimes used as makeshift supports, and clothing was positioned strategically to provide padding against the hard interior. People became experts at transforming limited resources into small improvements. You smile at the thought. Someone today might complain about an uncomfortable chair for a short wait, while a frontier traveller was carefully designing a sleeping arrangement inside a moving wooden vehicle. The standards were different, and so was the understanding of patience. The horses continue their work outside. You imagine the effort required from them as they pull through the cold. The driver must balance speed with care, understanding that pushing too hard could create problems later. The entire journey depends on maintaining a steady pace. The night does not reward impatience, it rewards endurance. The stagecoach moves through another open stretch of land, and the sky appears larger than ever. Without the lights of cities, the stars become bright and countless. You cannot help but imagine how many travellers looked upward during similar journeys and felt the same mixture of wonder and smallness. The frontier has a way of reminding people of their place in the world. The historical community remains divided over whether long stagecoach journeys were remembered accurately in later stories, or transformed into something more dramatic through popular imagination. Some researchers believe the legends capture a genuine spirit of adventure, while others argue that everyday travel was far more routine, difficult, and ordinary than the stories suggest. Perhaps the truth exists somewhere between these ideas. A journey can be ordinary and still be meaningful. A person can be uncomfortable and still feel amazed. A difficult experience can become a cherished memory. You look around the coach and realize that nobody here is living a legend. They are simply traveling. They are tired. They are cold. They are waiting to arrive. And yet, this ordinary moment is exactly what makes history feel alive. Not every important story begins with a famous person or a dramatic event. Sometimes history exists in small rooms, on quiet roads, among people who are simply trying to reach the next place. The coach continues moving. Your thoughts become slower. The sounds become softer. The lantern's glow feels warmer. You listen to the gentle breathing of the passengers and the steady movement of the vehicle beneath you. The frozen frontier remains outside, but inside this small wooden shelter, there is a peaceful feeling. Everyone is moving together. Everyone is waiting together. Everyone is carried forward by the same road. The night continues, but the hours no longer feel as heavy. The journey has found its rhythm, and you have found your place within it. The stagecoach rolls through the darkness, carrying you deeper into the quiet heart of the frontier, where every sound becomes familiar and every mile brings another moment of reflection. The stagecoach continues through the night. But your thoughts begin to move beyond the passengers inside. You start thinking about the people who make this journey possible. The coach may be the most visible part of the route, but behind every mile of travel are countless workers whose efforts remain mostly unseen. You picture the driver sitting at the front, focused on the trail ahead. You imagine the station keepers waiting in isolated buildings, preparing for travellers who may arrive at any hour. You think about the people who repair equipment, care for animals, prepare supplies, and maintain the fragile connections between distant communities. The frontier does not move because of one person. It moves because many people contribute small pieces of effort. The driver's role appears simple from inside the coach. Guide the horses, follow the road, continue forward. But the reality is much more demanding. A driver must understand the animals, the landscape, and the conditions. They must recognize when to move quickly and when to slow down. They must know when the road is safe and when caution is necessary. You listen for the driver's voice outside. It is calm and controlled. There is confidence there, but not carelessness. This person understands that the wilderness requires respect. A major transformation occurring across the country during this period was the growth of transportation systems that connected previously isolated regions. Stagecoach workers played an important role in this transition by providing services in areas where newer transportation methods had not yet reached. You realize that these workers were part of a changing world. They belonged to an era between older forms of travel and the modern systems that would soon reshape American life. The station keepers especially interest you. Their lives were often quiet and demanding. They worked in places where travelers arrived briefly and disappeared again into the distance. A station might not have been impressive, but it represented safety, rest, and connection. You imagine someone inside a small station late at night, listening for the sound of approaching wheels. Perhaps a fire is burning. Perhaps supplies are being organized. Perhaps fresh horses are being prepared. The arrival of a stagecoach would bring activity, a tired driver, cold passengers, new information, a reminder that the wider world still existed beyond the isolated landscape. A forgotten little detail about frontier stations is that many workers developed their own routines for welcoming travellers. From preparing simple meals to creating small areas where people could warm themselves. These practices were rarely recorded in official histories, but they reveal the everyday hospitality that helped difficult journeys continue. You think about those small acts. A hot drink offered to a stranger, a place to sit near a fire, a few minutes of conversation before returning to the road. These moments might seem ordinary, but on a freezing night, they could feel unforgettable inside the coach. The passengers remain quiet, but you now imagine the many people waiting somewhere ahead. The journey is not only between locations, it is between groups of people connected by effort. The horses need care. The roads need attention. The vehicles need repair. The travellers need support. Every part of the system depends on another. Experts still have different views on whether stagecoach workers should be remembered mainly as symbols of frontier independence or as examples of organised labour supporting a larger transportation network. Some emphasise the courage and skill required for the work, while others focus on the structured systems that made these journeys possible. You think about that question as the coach continues forward. The driver is clearly skilled. The workers are clearly essential. The journey itself requires both individual ability and collective effort. Perhaps that is what makes these stories interesting. The frontier is often described as a place of individuals. But everyday life reveals a much more connected picture. You look at the passengers around you and imagine the unseen people who helped each person reach this coach. Someone prepared a meal. Someone packed supplies. Someone offered advice. Someone repaired a piece of equipment. Someone cared for an animal. A journey begins long before the traveller arrives at the road. It begins with preparation. The coach moves steadily through the darkness, and you feel a deeper appreciation for the people behind the scenes. History often remembers the travellers and the destinations, but the workers who created the path deserve attention too. Their lives were built around responsibility. They worked in difficult conditions. They solved problems quietly. They kept things moving. There is something comforting about remembering them. Their stories are not filled with dramatic moments every day. Most of their work was routine. Most of their victories were small. But those small victories mattered. A repaired wheel, a prepared station, a healthy team of horses, a safe arrival. These were the achievements that kept frontier travel alive. The lantern continues glowing inside the coach. The passengers continue resting. The road continues stretching ahead. You imagine all the people connected to this single journey, from the person who built the coach to the person who will welcome passengers at the next stop. The stagecoach is not just wooden wheels, it is a moving collection of human effort. And as you continue through the cold frontier night, you begin to see the journey differently. You're not only travelling across a landscape, you are travelling through a network of lives, each person adding something small but important to the road ahead. The night begins to loosen its grip on the landscape, and you notice the first signs that the long darkness is slowly coming to an end. The stagecoach continues forward, but the feeling inside the coach has changed. The deepest hours of cold have passed. The passengers who were once lost in their own thoughts begin to stir. The road still stretches ahead, but now it carries the quiet promise of morning. You open your eyes and look toward the window. The darkness is no longer complete. The sky has softened slightly, shifting from deep black toward shades of grey and pale blue. The snow reflects the early light, turning the frozen landscape into something almost dreamlike. After hours of shadows, the world outside begins to reveal itself again. The trees become clearer, the hills return, the trail appears beneath the wheels. You realize how much the night had hidden from you. The frontier looks different in the morning, at night. It felt mysterious and endless. In daylight, it becomes a landscape with details, patterns, and signs of life. You can see the places where the wind has shaped the snow. You can see tracks left behind by animals. You can see the route that carried you through the darkness. The passengers notice the change too. Conversations slowly return. Someone stretches carefully after hours of sitting. Another traveller looks outside and smiles at the sight of morning arriving. Everyone has made it through the night. That simple fact feels meaningful. During this period, one major shift affecting American life was the continued movement of people toward new settlements and expanding communities. Transportation routes such as stage lines help support migration, commerce, and communication by connecting places that would otherwise remain separated by great distances. You think about the many people who depended on these routes, a person travelling toward a new home, a worker searching for opportunity, a family waiting for supplies, a community hoping for news from the outside world. The stagecoach carried all of these possibilities. The morning air feels different even through the closed windows. You imagine the cold outside, the crisp smell of snow, and the quiet freshness of a landscape untouched by the noise of cities. The horses continue their work, but they seem more visible now. You can see their movements, their breath, and the careful effort behind every step. The driver guides them with the same attention used throughout the night. You wonder how many mornings like this the driver has experienced. How many sunrises appeared after difficult journeys. How many times did tired passengers step out of a coach and feel the relief of arrival? A small but surprising detail from frontier travel was that many travellers developed strong attachments to certain routes, stations, or landmarks, because those places represented safety and familiarity after long stretches of uncertainty. A simple bend in the road or a familiar building could become a comforting symbol for someone who had spent days travelling through unfamiliar territory. You imagine a traveller recognizing a distant hill and realizing the destination is closer than expected. That feeling must have been powerful. After hours of darkness and uncertainty, even a small sign of progress could bring enormous relief. The coach continues forward, and your thoughts become reflective. The journey has changed you in small ways. At the beginning, you noticed mostly the discomfort, the cold seat, the rough road, the limited space. Now, you notice different things. The patience of the passengers, the skill of the driver, the quiet beauty of the landscape, the connection created between strangers. The interpretation of frontier expansion remains a topic of discussion among historians. Some view these journeys as examples of determination and adaptation, while others focus on the challenges, conflicts, and hardships that accompanied settlement and travel. The same stage route could represent hope for one person and difficulty for another. You look outside at the frozen landscape and understand why history can be complicated. The frontier was not one single experience. It was many experiences happening at once. For some, it was a place of opportunity. For others, it was a place of uncertainty. For everyone, it required adjustment. The passengers begin preparing for the next stage of the journey. Small belongings are checked. Coats are arranged. People become more alert as the possibility of arrival approaches. You notice how quickly a group can change. During the coldest hours, everyone seemed focused on endurance. Now, with morning arriving, curiosity returns. People look ahead. People imagine what waits beyond the next stretch of road. You feel that same anticipation. The stagecoach has carried you through darkness, but it has also carried you through a collection of human moments. The journey was not only about distance, it was about the experience of moving through a world where patience and resilience shaped everyday life. The sun rises higher, and the snow begins to sparkle. The landscape that seemed intimidating during the night now appears peaceful. The same wilderness that surrounded you with uncertainty has become a scene of quiet beauty. You listen to the familiar sounds one more time, the wheels, the horses, the voices of passengers, the gentle movement of the coach. Soon, this part of the journey will become a memory. But for now, you remain inside the wooden coach, watching the frontier wake up around you. The coldest hours are behind you, the road ahead is brighter, and after surviving the long winter night, you understand something the travellers of 1884 knew well. A journey is not measured only by where you arrive. It is also measured by everything you experience along the way. The stagecoach continues toward the final stretch of the journey, and the landscape slowly begins to change. The wilderness that surrounded you for so many hours starts to reveal signs of human presence again. The road becomes more familiar. The distance feels shorter. The feeling of being completely separated from the world begins to fade. You look through the window and notice small signs that the destination is approaching. A cleared section of trail. A fence standing against the snow. Smoke rising faintly in the distance. These details may seem ordinary, but after a night spent surrounded by darkness and wilderness, they feel almost extraordinary. The passengers notice them too. A quiet excitement moves through the coach. Nobody celebrates loudly. This is not a dramatic arrival scene from a storybook. It is something more realistic. Tired people recognizing that a difficult journey is nearly complete. You adjust your coat and sit a little straighter. Your body is tired from the long ride. But your mind feels awake. You have spent the night listening, watching, and experiencing a world that moves at a very different pace. The stagecoach slows as it approaches the settlement. The wheels continue turning. The horses continue walking. The driver guides the team with the same careful attention used throughout the journey. A detail often overlooked about this era is that stagecoach stops and small settlements were frequently shaped around the practical needs of travellers. Locations were not chosen only for appearance. Access to water, shelter, routes, and resources played major roles in determining where communities developed. You imagine the people who built these places. They looked at the landscape and searched for opportunities to create connection. A small building beside a road could become a meeting point for travellers, workers, and families. The settlement ahead is not a grand city. It does not need to be, after the frozen wilderness. Even a modest collection of buildings feels welcoming. The passengers begin preparing to leave. Belongings are gathered, coats are adjusted, final conversations take place. The temporary community created inside the coach is about to separate. It is a strange feeling. You have shared hours with people whose names you may not even know. You have listened to their stories. You have experienced the same cold and the same road. Yet soon, everyone will continue with their own lives. A forgotten little detail about 19th century travel is that passengers often exchange small pieces of information during these journeys, creating informal networks of knowledge. A person might learn about job opportunities, safer routes, family news, or conditions in another settlement simply by sharing conversation with fellow travellers. In a world without instant communication, these exchanges mattered. The stagecoach was not only carrying people, it was carrying information. You think about the stories that have travelled along these routes, news from distant towns, personal messages, advice from experienced travellers, warnings about difficult roads. Every passenger added something to the flow of information. You step down from the coach in your imagination and feel the change immediately. The ground beneath your feet feels different after so many hours of movement. Your legs feel unfamiliar for a moment. The fresh air feels sharper than expected. You look back at the stagecoach. It no longer seems like a simple vehicle. It feels like a companion that carried you through one of the most demanding parts of the frontier night. The horses stand quietly after their long effort. The driver begins the familiar tasks of finishing one journey and preparing for the next. There is no dramatic pause because frontier life continues. Another trip will begin. Another group of passengers will climb aboard. Researchers continue to examine how stagecoach journeys shaped memories of the American frontier. Some believe these experiences helped create a shared identity among travellers who crossed similar landscapes. Others suggest that later generations transformed ordinary transportation into symbols of adventure and independence. You think about your own experience inside the coach. Was it an adventure? Was it a necessity? Was it simply a long night of travel? Perhaps it was all of these things. History often becomes meaningful because ordinary experiences reveal larger truths. A stagecoach journey shows how people adapted to distance, weather, and uncertainty. It shows how communities remained connected even when separated by enormous spaces. The settlement grows brighter as morning fully arrives. People begin their daily routines. Fires are tended, doors open, conversations begin. The world continues. The frontier is no longer hidden by darkness. You can see the details now. The buildings, the roads, the people, the landscape. Yet a small part of the night remains with you. You remember the sound of wheels moving through snow. You remember the warmth of the lantern. You remember the quiet voices of strangers becoming companions. Those memories are the true destination of the journey, not just the place where the coach stops, not just the end of the road, the experience itself. You take one last look at the frozen landscape surrounding the settlement. It no longer appears endless or intimidating. It appears like a place filled with stories. Every trail has travelers. Every building has memories. Every winter night has people trying to reach somewhere safe. The stagecoach journey is complete, but the world it revealed continues. You've travelled through cold, darkness, and uncertainty, but you have also discovered patience, connection, and the quiet strength of ordinary people who crossed the frontier one careful mile at a time. The stagecoach has reached its destination, but the journey remains with you. As the morning settles over the frontier, you find yourself looking back on the hour spent inside that wooden coach and the strange little world created during one frozen night in 1884. The road is behind you now, but the sounds remain. The steady rhythm of the wheels, the soft movement of the horses, the quiet conversations between passengers, the gentle flicker of the lantern. These details stay because they are not simply parts of transportation. They were moments of human experience. You begin to understand that travel in the 19th century was not only about arriving somewhere. The journey itself shaped people. It tested patience. It encouraged observation. It created unexpected connections between strangers who might never meet again. You think about the passengers who shared the coach with you. At the beginning, they were simply unfamiliar faces sitting across from you. By the end, they had become companions of the road. You may never know their full stories. You may never know where they came from or where life took them afterward. But for one night, your paths crossed. That is one of the quiet mysteries of history. People who lived long ago often feel distant because we know only pieces of their lives. A name in a document, a record of a journey, a brief mention in a local story. Yet behind those fragments were real people. They were cold. They were tired. They were hopeful. They were human. One major transformation of the late 19th century was the increasing movement toward faster and more connected forms of transportation, including expanded rail networks that changed how Americans traveled and communicated as newer systems developed. Older methods like stagecoach travel gradually became less central in many regions, but the experiences created along those routes remained part of the country's social memory. You imagine how different the world must have felt to those travellers. A journey that required days of effort could create memories that lasted for years. The distance itself gave experiences more weight today. People can cross enormous spaces quickly and comfortably. A trip that once required endurance may now take only a short time. That progress is remarkable, but it also changes the way people experience movement. A frontier journey demanded attention. It required people to notice the world around them, the weather, the landscape, the people beside them. You remember the quiet details that could easily have been missed, the way passengers shared small acts of kindness, the way the driver listened to the road, the way a distant light could bring comfort after hours of darkness. A small but surprising practice from the period was that travellers sometimes collected small souvenirs from places they passed, such as a simple stone, a piece of local material, or another object that reminded them of a journey. These items were not valuable in a financial sense, but they carried personal meaning. You imagine someone keeping a tiny reminder of a difficult winter trip. Years later, that object might bring back the sound of snow, the feeling of the cold air, and the memory of strangers sharing a cramped coach. Objects can hold stories. The historical meaning of frontier travel remains interpreted in different ways by researchers. Some view these journeys as examples of adaptation and human determination. Others emphasize that they were often difficult experiences shaped by limited choices and challenging conditions. You think back to the night inside the coach and realize both perspectives can exist together. The travelers were determined. They were also facing hardship. They were creating new possibilities. They were also dealing with uncertainty. History is rarely just one feeling. It is usually many feelings happening at once. You look around the settlement and notice the ordinary activities beginning. People walk along the road, doors open, supplies are moved. Conversations start. The arrival of the stagecoach becomes part of the daily rhythm. Soon, the coach that carried you through the night will become just another vehicle waiting for another journey. Another group of travellers will climb inside, another set of stories will begin. That thought feels comforting. The road continues, the stories continue, the connections continue. You realise that the stagecoach was never only about the coach itself. It represented a larger idea. People have always searched for ways to connect with one another, even when the distance between them feels overwhelming. The frontier was vast, but people found ways to cross it. They built roads. They created stations. They shared knowledge. They helped each other continue. You remember the coldest hours of the journey and how impossible they seemed at first. The darkness, the uncertainty, the endless movement. Yet the night passed. Morning arrived. The journey continued until it became a memory. There is something deeply calming about that realization. Difficult moments often feel endless while we are experiencing them, but time continues moving. The road eventually changes. The landscape shifts. The next morning arrives. The stagecoach journey becomes a quiet reminder of resilience. Not dramatic resilience, not the kind that belongs only in heroic stories, the ordinary kind, the kind found in travellers who keep walking, the kind found in workers who keep preparing, the kind found in people who continue through cold nights because they have somewhere they need to go. You carry that feeling with you as you look once more at the frozen frontier landscape. The snow still covers the ground, the air is still cold, the road still stretches into the distance. But now you see something different. You see the human stories hidden within it. The memory of the stagecoach night stays with you as the frontier slowly fades into the background. The journey has ended, but the meaning of that journey continues. You begin to look beyond the wooden coach, beyond the snowy trail, and toward the larger story created by countless travellers who crossed these landscapes. The stagecoach was never only a way to move from one place to another. It was part of a changing nation. It carried people through a period when communities were expanding, industries were growing, and the relationship between distance and connection was being transformed. You think about the frozen road you travelled. At the time, it felt endless. Every mile required patience, every stop mattered, every person involved in the journey played a role. Now, looking back, you can see how those individual journeys became part of a much larger pattern. By the final decades of the 19th century, American society was experiencing rapid changes in transportation, communication, and settlement. Railroads expanded, towns grew, and older travel systems gradually adapted to a world that was becoming more connected. Yet the stagecoach did not simply disappear from memory. It remained a symbol. For some people, it represented adventure and exploration. For others, it represented ordinary work, difficult conditions, and the daily effort required to keep communities connected. You think about the people you encountered during the journey: the driver, the station workers, the passengers, the people preparing supplies behind the scenes. Their lives were not just part of a dramatic frontier story, they were part of everyday history. A curious glimpse into everyday frontier routines is that many communities developed strong traditions around welcoming travellers because visitors often brought news, stories, and information from distant places. A person arriving from another settlement was not just a customer or a passenger. They were often a moving source of knowledge. Imagine arriving after a long journey and being asked not only where you're going, but what you've seen along the way. A traveller could describe a town, a weather event, a family story, or a new opportunity. These conversations helped communities feel connected across enormous distances. The stagecoach carried more than physical objects. It carried experiences. You begin to think about how memories are created. A person might forget the exact number of miles travelled or the specific shape of every road, but they remember feelings, the warmth of a shared shelter, the kindness of a stranger, the relief of seeing a light in the distance, the sound of wheels moving through snow. These details survive because they are human. The legacy of frontier travel remains a subject of discussion among historians. Some researchers emphasize how stage routes helped create stronger connections between isolated communities. Others point out that these systems also reflected a period of difficult expansion, unequal experiences, and complicated social changes. The same stagecoach route could mean different things to different people. A business owner might see opportunity. A traveller might see adventure. A worker might see long hours and responsibility. A family might see a path toward a new life. History is filled with these different perspectives. You look again at the image of the stagecoach moving through the frozen night. Popular stories often focus on dramatic moments, but the true importance of these journeys may come from the ordinary experiences they created. People waiting at stations, drivers guiding teams through difficult conditions, passengers sharing space with strangers, communities depending on regular connections. These moments form the foundation of daily life. A road becomes meaningful because people use it. A building becomes important because people gather there. A journey becomes memorable because people experience it. You think about how transportation shapes human relationships. A new road can change where people live. A faster route can change how communities communicate. A reliable connection can transform a place that once felt isolated The Stagecoach helped create those connections in many frontier regions. It was not perfect, it was not easy, but it mattered. You imagine the thousands of travellers who sat in similar coaches over the years. Each person had different reasons for travelling. Each carried different hopes and concerns. Some journeys were successful, some were difficult, some were probably forgotten, but together they created a larger story. There is something peaceful about remembering that history is not only made by famous names and major events, it is also made by ordinary people sitting inside uncomfortable coaches, travelling through cold nights and doing what they need to do. You think about your own place in this story. You're not simply observing the past. You're sharing a moment with people who lived in a different world but experienced many familiar feelings. The desire to arrive safely, the hope for a better future, the comfort of companionship, the need to keep moving. Those emotions connect generations. The frontier landscape remains quiet in your imagination. The snow-covered roads, the wooden stations, and the distant settlements all belong to another time, but the lessons remain. Travel requires patience. Communities require cooperation. Memories are created through small moments. The Stagecoach disappears slowly into history, but the feeling of the journey remains. The wheels stop turning, the horses rest, the passengers continue with their lives. Yet somewhere in memory, that frozen night continues moving forward, carrying the stories of everyone who travelled through America's coldest frontier roads. The Stagecoach journey has carried you through the coldest hours of the frontier night, through darkness, uncertainty, and the endless movement of the winter road. Now, as you reach the final part of this experience, you find yourself looking back at everything that happened inside that wooden coach. The journey began with a simple departure, a road, a group of travellers, a cold night ahead. But somewhere between the first turn of the wheels and the arrival of morning, the journey became something more. It became a collection of small moments that reveal how people lived, travelled, and connected in another time. You remember the feeling of climbing into the coach when the night was just beginning, the unfamiliar faces, the cold air, the uncertainty about what waited ahead. Now those same memories feel different. The darkness that once seemed overwhelming became a background for human stories. The discomfort became part of the experience. The strangers became temporary companions. You understand that a journey is often shaped less by the destination and more by what happens along the way. The Stagecoach was a simple machine, but it carried complicated lives, a person searching for opportunity, a worker returning home, a family moving toward a new beginning, a traveller carrying messages that connected distant places. Each passenger added another layer to the story. An important part of the era's development was the way transportation networks helped reshape communities across the United States. Routes that carried passengers and supplies also influenced where people settled, how businesses developed, and how information moved between distant regions. You think about the road beneath the coach. It was not just a line across the landscape, it was a connection between people. A road creates possibility because people use it. A route becomes meaningful because lives pass along it. A simple journey becomes history because someone remembers it. You imagine the future of the Stagecoach route after your night has ended. Other travellers will arrive. Other conversations will happen. Other stories will unfold inside the same wooden walls. The coach will continue doing what it was built to do, carry people forward. A small oddity preserved from frontier travel was the habit some travellers had of giving names to especially memorable journeys, storms, or difficult sections of road. These names often came from local stories and personal experiences rather than official records. A challenging crossing could become known by a phrase that only nearby communities understood. You like the idea that people created their own ways of remembering places. A frozen hill was not just a frozen hill, it was the place where a difficult night was survived. A station was not just a building, it was where tired travellers found warmth. A road was not just a path, it was where lives briefly crossed. The meaning of these frontier journeys continues to inspire different interpretations among historians. Some see them as examples of determination and adaptation during a changing period in American history. Others focus on the challenges and complicated realities behind the romantic image of the frontier. You understand why both views exist. The journey was beautiful. The journey was difficult. The journey was filled with possibility. The journey required sacrifice. Human experiences are rarely simple. You think about the quiet moments that never appeared in famous stories. The passenger who shared food. The worker who repaired equipment late at night. The driver who carefully guided the horses through difficult conditions. These moments may seem small, but they created the reality of frontier life. History is often built from thousands of ordinary actions. Someone prepares, someone helps, someone continues, someone remembers. That is why this Stagecoach journey feels so alive. It is not only about transportation, it is about people adapting to a world that demanded patience. The frontier moved slowly. The people within it learned to do the same. You look once more at the imagined road stretching across the snowy landscape. The cold remains, the wilderness remains, the challenges remain, but now they appear different. The frontier is no longer only a place of hardship, it is also a place of creativity, a place where people solved problems with limited resources, a place where communities formed despite distance, a place where strangers became companions for a few important hours. You realize that sleeping inside an 1884 stagecoach was never truly about finding perfect comfort. It was about experiencing a different relationship with time. The journey forced you to slow down, to listen, to notice, to appreciate small things, a warm lantern, a familiar voice, a steady road, a safe arrival. Those details mattered because they were not guaranteed. The travellers of the frontier understood something that modern life sometimes hides. Convenience can make movement easier, but difficulty can make moments more memorable. The stagecoach finally rests. The horses are quiet. The passengers step into the morning. The long winter night becomes a story they may tell again someday. And now, in this quiet moment, you leave the stagecoach behind. You leave behind the rattling wheels and frozen trails. You leave behind the lantern glow and the cold wind. But you carry forward the feeling of the journey, the understanding that history is not only found in grand events, it is found in ordinary people travelling ordinary roads under extraordinary conditions. It is found in the small choices that help people continue. It is found in the connections created along the way. The frozen frontier night has ended, but its story remains. A story of patience, a story of endurance, a story of people moving forward together through the cold darkness, trusting that morning would eventually arrive. The stagecoach becomes smaller in your imagination as the road fades into the distance. The sounds soften now. The wheels no longer rattle sharply, the horses no longer hurry. Everything settles into a quiet stillness. You return to the snowy landscape one last time. The sky is calm. The trail rests beneath a blanket of white. The old wooden coach waits peacefully after carrying its passengers through the night. You breathe slowly and imagine the cold air becoming gentler. The distant wind becomes a quiet whisper. The stars above the frontier slowly fade as morning light spreads across the horizon. You do not need to travel any farther now. You have arrived. The worries of the road can be left behind. The difficult miles are finished, the darkness has passed. Think of the lantern glowing softly inside the coach. Think of the warmth created by strangers sharing a small space. Think of the steady rhythm that carried you forward when the night felt endless. Let those sounds become quieter. Let the road become softer. Let the frontier rest. History is full of journeys, but every journey eventually reaches a peaceful pause. This one ends beneath a quiet morning sky, with the snow shining gently and the old trail disappearing into memory. You're safe, you're warm, the stagecoach has stopped, the night is complete, and somewhere far away, beneath the same wide sky, the old frontier road continues resting quietly, holding the stories of everyone who travelled across it. Sweet dreams,